Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Erin, and I am the content strategist at BrightTALK for the BI and analytics and big data management communities. And today you're tuning in to the BrightTALK live panel discussion, Bringing Data to Life with Visual Insights. So moving forward here, just a little bit of background on my role before we kick off the discussion. As I mentioned, I am the content strategist here at BrightTALK, and I manage the BI and analytics and big data management communities. I specialize in creating and curating content around the topics of machine learning, AI, advanced analytics, data visualization, big data, and BI tools. And I do this globally by collaborating with experts from all over the world to create content that will help keep our audience informed and engaged on what's happening in the industry. So if you have any questions about how you or someone you know can get involved in our BI community on BrightTALK, you can email me at ejunio@brighttalk.com, or you can contact me via the Twitter handle on the slide here. And lastly, before we get to our panelist introductions, I just want to remind the audience that this is indeed a live panel, and we want to keep it interactive as well. So this is the perfect opportunity to submit any questions you have during the presentation using the question box on your screen, and we'll try to get those answered for you by the panelists towards the end of the discussion today. And as always, don't forget to rate the webinar and provide any comments at the end if you can, because we do appreciate the feedback. So I'm here today with a couple of great panelists. We have Aaron Kalb. He is the co-founder and chief data officer at Elation. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron, for the introduction. Great to be here.
Awesome. And we're also very happy to have with us today Ashley Howard. She is the senior technical evangelist at Tableau. Welcome, Ashley. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So I guess if we could just do a quick round of introductions for each of your backgrounds and your areas of expertise, that would be great. So Aaron, would you like to kick us off with some background on yourself?
Happy to. So real briefly, my academic background was studying symbolic systems at Stanford for my bachelor's and master's degree, and within that, I was really focused on human-computer interaction. So what gets me super excited is computers sort of meeting people where they are, whether that's with voice interfaces or visual interfaces or what have you. I worked on Siri and a bunch of other things at Apple before founding Elation, and have been at Elation obviously ever since.
Very cool. That's excellent. All right. Ashley, would you like to give us some background on yourself?
Yeah, so I am a numbers person. I studied economics in college and found myself in an analyst role about 10, 11 years ago. And about 9 years ago, I just discovered Tableau and thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. really just sort of game-changing in how I did my job, and had the opportunity to join the company about 6 years ago. And I spent my first couple years with the company on site with customers, helping them use the software, helping them understand how to integrate data visualization into their business. And then I had the opportunity to help lead how we use Tableau at Tableau, which was a really, really fun role working with development. And earlier this year, I moved into this fun technical evangelist role where I get to go out and talk to people about the power of data and visualization.
Awesome. Great. Well, I think we're about to have a really great discussion here. You guys have very interesting backgrounds. So let's skip here to our first slide, and we can kick off the discussion with a couple introductory questions just to set the stage for today's discussion. Ashley, maybe you can start us off with your perspective on this topic here. So we hear a lot of buzzwords like data analysis, data visualization, data storytelling, but how do we truly differentiate between these concepts, and how are each of these terms unique from each other?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think a lot of people do get these concepts confused. You know, data analysis is really about understanding data. It's about writing calculations and digging into the data. A lot of what you hear in sort of data analysis is the domain of statisticians or people who have specialized skills with data. And then this thing called data visualization came along, and it was this tool to help people who weren't necessarily numbers people, didn't have a strong background in data, to be able to grab insights from the data. So visualization is really a tool to do analysis and to make analysis easier. When you're visualizing data, you can sort of go one of two ways with it. Often what we see is sort of the first step process where I have a question for myself with the data in front of me and I want to analyze it. And using visualizations, you can find insights. But once you find those insights, you need to share those insights with others. And that's where data storytelling comes in, where now I have this thought about the data, and I want to explain that thought to you. And so I can leverage even more best practices in data visualization to tell that story even better, to come across clearer to the audience. When we get into immersive analytics, it's really about no longer having a static experience, because once I've found something or once someone else has found something, the best case scenario is that it incites another question. And you don't want to have to go all the way back to the drawing board and restart that process all over again. You want it to be right there in the flow, being able to interact with that data to lead you to the next insight, because it's not the first insight that matters. It's really the second or third or fourth that ends up having the biggest value.
Right, right. Sort of a holistic approach to the process. Great.
Yeah, because once you find something, you really want to know why it's happening. And so immersive analytics is really about stringing that together. You're spot on with that.
Awesome. Erin, do you have anything to add, any perspectives from your role at Elation?
I think Ashley did an incredible job introducing the topic. The one thing that I would add that we sometimes hear from customers around the idea of data storytelling is that storytelling, those can be true stories, and it can be a journalistic enterprise of truth-seeking. Sometimes there are false narratives that can get woven, and so one thing our customers talk about a lot is what's the right balance? How do you couple data storytelling with data literacy and data culture, so people are not misinterpreting the numbers they're seeing or maybe being misled by somebody who's trying to use data to push a certain agenda instead of seeing the truth the data is showing them.
Right, right, absolutely. So that kind of segues us into our next slide here, which gets a little bit more in-depth about how to tell a data story. So I'd like to start with you, Erin, on this one, since you just kind of capped off our introduction. What advice do you have when it comes to crafting a data story or narrative, and where do you recommend starting, and what questions should businesses be asking?
Yeah, totally. So I think as Ashley highlighted, really, data visualization, data storytelling, most people who do this work are really motivated by curiosity and are just full of questions. And every answer they see makes 5 more questions pop up. So I think it can be a very, very exploratory process on the front end, and that can lead to a challenge once you have all of these different threads. How do you tell a story that's clear and coherent and actionable? I think that's one of the key things in a business context, is to make sure the story is actionable, but without throwing away a lot of the nuance that can help the decision makers looking at your data story put it into context. So I think that's really the balance we try to focus on is putting in the right level of detail and context where it's not a jumble, but it's also not misleadingly simplified.
Right, absolutely. That's a very difficult balance to strike. Ashley, in your opinion, is there a right or a wrong way to tell a data story?
There are many right ways to tell a data story, but not all ways of telling a data story are necessarily right. And I think Erin was really starting to get into that with what he was saying, which is sometimes the story you think you're telling is not correct because you haven't done the due diligence on the front end to make sure that you have the complete picture within the data itself. Sometimes there could be maybe days missing, and that's why the story that you're seeing is not accurate. I think the other side is that once you really have the confidence in your data and you found an insight and you're going to tell a story, the techniques and tools that you use to develop that insight are not necessarily the best way to share that story. So oftentimes what I see when I'm sort of out with people, even here at Tableau when people are presenting data stories, is what they do is they tell us how they found the insight. They don't tell us why the insight matters. And I think that second part, that actionableness of the insight that you found, is important. Completely understand how you get to the insight you found, but set that aside in what you're thinking about presenting. Saying, now that I have this insight, let me start over fresh with a new visualization to think about how I can best share this insight and the impact of making a change. And so if you focus that direction, you'll end up having a much stronger data story as a result.
Got it. Great advice. Okay. So moving on to our next slide here, I'd really like to hear everyone's thoughts on some of the ways enterprises are actually benefiting from visualization tools and techniques that are in use today. So Erin, can you tell us what are some common business problems that enterprises are addressing and solving with data visualization tools and strategies that you're seeing?
Well, I think one reason Alation and Tableau are such great partners is that we each have technologies that are used just all over the place. You know, these are technologies that are not specific to any one geography or any one industry vertical or any one kind of business problem. I think almost anything organizations are doing with data can be supported with great analytics and great visualization. So we hear examples from, giving iPads to people in the field, whether they're, stocking shelves in a retail store or, moving around concrete on a construction site, having visualizations that are relevant to them doing that work about, to supplies and inventory levels and things like that, to executives looking at dashboards at the start of their, weekly tactical planning meetings, and everything in between. So yeah, I can go on and on, but I want to give Ashley a chance to talk about some of the trends or examples she might be seeing.
Well, thanks, Erin. I think that, one of the things that we're starting to see as the ability to connect data across the enterprise becomes easier is that really it used to be that I owned this data in my role, or I owned the application that generated the data, and I was the one that got to ask questions of this data. I think more and more what we're seeing is that there are a lot of systems owned by IT, applications owned by different areas of the business that has data that, when made available to a broader group within the organization, has a lot of value. So one of the use cases I really like here is we were able at Tableau to look at our phone log data for our sales team and really understand, hey, how often are calls going to voicemail, and how often are, how long is the average call that a salesperson is on? That was data owned by the business that our sales managers would never have been able to get access to. But once we were able to share that data more broadly in the company, that sales management team jumped on that data so that they could better coach their employees. And so often the data that you initially think of, phone log data, can have a lot of other business value elsewhere.
Got it.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one thing I'd like to add is in response to that last question about pitfalls and challenges. I think it is indeed incredibly exciting to see what an organization can do when people at every level are empowered to see and understand the data that they have. But content without context can be a real issue. One thing I do as CDO is to try to learn from all of our customer CDOs and bring those best practices back in. And so many folks in our customer community are excited about data democratization, as are we. But we had an example where we had some dashboarding available to show a usage and adoption of Alation within a given customer, which lets our customer success team serve them, much better. But when all of that information is aggregated, it's harder to interpret because sometimes we have gaps in the data from different customers, and the aggregate view is hard to understand in the individual customer view, and people could get very confused about what the trend was. So it's all about making sure people are empowered to see the data, but also with the context that lets them interpret it correctly for the business.
Great. Yeah, so context can be a challenge. Ashley, do you have any insight on what pitfalls and challenges to be aware of?
I think Aaron's spot on that context is important. When you give data to people without context, they often don't have the information they need to be able to find the insight. And so that's why it's really important to put data in the hands of the people who understand that data best. But those people are often business people, and they don't have a strong background in data. And so they might not know the difference between a median and an average and which one to use when. And so they always have the best intentions of wanting to use the data. So I think you have to couple that adding context with making sure that people have the skills needed. You know, the technologies have gotten so much easier for everyone throughout an organization to do analysis with data and visual analysis with data, but that doesn't mean that people don't need to be trained and they don't need help developing literacy with data, and that they don't need to be supported in other ways.
Right, absolutely. Great. So moving on to this next slide, addressing strategy and execution of data visualization. We have a few discussion points surrounding the finer details of strategy, as well as the actual execution of visualization for business data. So I'd like to get each of your perspectives on best practices for business users who are just getting started with visualization tools. Aaron, can you start us off here?
Yeah, happy to. So I think, you know, as Ashley was I think making a great point referencing, business users may not see themselves as data people. You know, it's one thing for folks who are data analysts or data scientists and have data in their titles to use data. They often have a familiarity with stats and the math and some of the technical skills to understand. So I think there's sort of two modalities that we'll see here. There's the business user who's a bit afraid of data and kind of gets nervous about it and makes, you know, jokes and doesn't feel confident. And then there's folks who are overconfident, who don't even know what they don't know and can say, oh, well, this chart's going up and to the right. This thing must be a huge success. And actually, they're just seeing something that's seasonality or you know, randomness that they're interpreting as signal. And so I think as you get wider and wider adoption, it's important to just figure out how you're going to bridge those gaps. Some companies are using sort of data translators or data ambassadors and really focusing on training the data people to be better at communicating with the business. Others flip that around and say data literacy. How do we train folks to be confident but appropriately skeptical consumers of data? So I think it's just good to have good technology as well as good programs and philosophy to back it up.
Absolutely. Ashley, do you have any insight on best practices?
Yeah, I think, you know, continuing the discussion, that you need to not just understand the tools, but you need to also understand data. And so there are a lot of tools, Tableau amongst them, that make getting to the data easier. And I think that's really been the big hurdle for business users for a long time. And then it's helping them understand not how to use the tool, but how to use data. And that's why it's so important for leaders within an organization, managers, to sort of set the, I just forgot the word, to go forth first and sort of show them that it is safe to use data, it's safe to bring data into the conversation, and then how that can happen. That you don't need to just go off and work, but it can be a collaborative process amongst many people. And I think it's that collaborative process where people each bring their best skills and sort of form a community around data that really helps business users to thrive using any visualization tool.
Right, absolutely. It's like a language, I guess. You need to understand data, the data language first before you can say something meaningful with it. So it's very much a data literacy issue and educating people and supporting them.
Yeah, and then it's completely, yeah.
Great. So Aaron, what is the role of data governance for data visualization?
Sure. I think, with the last question in this one, I don't want to be too much of a salesman, but I can't really avoid it at this point. We really feel like one of the best ways to make data welcoming and approachable for everybody, whether they're technical or a business user, is to use a data catalog. And as some people in the audience may know, Elation was the first, and we like to think we're the best data catalog. And what that means is, a data catalog is kind of like Amazon.com is a product catalog where you can see all the different things you could buy, and some are 5 stars and some are not. It's the same thing for data, which can help people know what they can trust and what they can use as they begin to do visualization or whatever for the first time. And so the role that governance plays in all of this is, you can make a beautiful looking visualization, but if the underlying data is not up to date, is calculated differently than you expect, that'll be a beautiful story that's beautiful and totally wrong. And so governance is about that layer of helping the subject matter experts and data stewards and other folks kind of label and annotate and specify which data sources are the ones that are going to yield results that are not just compelling but also accurate.
Great, yeah. So it's definitely the less sort of exciting or sexy part, but it's definitely necessary, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah, the thing that's really not sexy is when you, present something to your boss's boss, and then a month later, once you spend a ton of money on the wrong choice, it turns out that your data was wrong. So it's something that doesn't seem fun, but in service of really good results.
Definitely. So when it comes to actually presenting the data to your audience, Ashley, maybe you can start us off here. How do you recommend people tailor their approach to their visualizations? In other words, is there a difference in the way that you would create a visualization for a technical audience versus a business user or even an executive role?
So I think tailoring your approach to these audiences, I think at the beginning is really the thing that you need to think about is time. How much time do I have with this person to get my point across? And if I have a short amount of time, I sort of need to come in high level, and then I need to deconstruct sort of the supporting arguments and assumptions for, say, an executive. So here is our number. These are the things you need to know about that number. You can see it broken down here by, say, different region or different category, and then adding on that value at the end, versus I think someone who's a little bit more technical really wants to hear those assumptions in the lead up. So these are the things I'm seeing. We notice this trend here, we notice this trend here, and it sort of accumulates in this sort of more technical analysis of the problem. So if I go into a technical audience, I really want to talk about sort of the details and the data behind it. If I go into an executive audience, I really want to be talking more about the impact of this thing I've found. Being ready to sort of defend it and back it up when they have questions, but really knowing that they're trusting me to do the analysis, and so I'm going to present the high level analysis to them and allow them to ask questions where they have them.
Great. Yeah, those are some great distinctions. Aaron, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was a really great point. I would love, if that's all right, to speak a little bit to the over-influencing question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
This is one that's really near and dear to my heart, because as Ashley was talking about, you're speaking with a less savvy audience. It can be, frankly, like shooting fish in a barrel to twist the data to push for an opinion you already have, sort of with confirmation bias, instead of actually seeing what the data is telling you. And I think, interestingly in organizations, I think the sense of sort of ethics here are not always as clear. Everyone in journalism would know that if a politician says, I think it would not be a very good idea to do X, and you just use ... to elide out the not, that would be totally mischaracterizing what happened. but people often I'll see, cutting the start and stop date for an analysis or just using a really misleading statistics. So I think, obviously ethically, you want to make sure you're always letting the data show you the truth instead of using the data to push a perspective. I think where it gets more interesting is once you move away from that black and white, deliberately lying with the data, and look at when people can accidentally lie with data. One of my favorite examples with this is small sample sizes. So we'll have, population A, B, and C, and we're measuring some outcome that's desirable. And saying, 11.7% of people in group A do something, and 12.3% of people in group B do something, and then 33.3% of people in group C do something, and you look at the bar graph and it's like, we got to target group C. Well, if you look deeper, often the reason you get 33.3 is because, there's only 3 people in group C, and 1 out of the 3, did the, clicked buy or whatever it was. And somebody who's not savvy enough to kind of spot the fraction, or for, less easily recognizable ones, can look at 1 and 3 as this incredibly significant effect size. And if you don't take steps to show error bars or show populations using the education, you can wind up in a very misleading place totally by accident. So I think it's the duty of every data visualizer to really check their own work and do some education to make sure that they're not lying deliberately or otherwise with their viz.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think there absolutely is a duty there. We are living in a world where people are making very big, important decisions with data, and a lot of those decisions often have societal implications as well. So it's very important to keep objectivity in mind when we're using data to make these types of decisions. Ashley, do you have anything to add on that point?
Yeah, I think that, it's really easy when you see that outlier, you see that spike, to feel like, hey, aha, I found something. Like, we all want to have those moments. And I think, as analysts, we do have a duty to sort of step back and say, what am I not seeing here? What's missing? What would I expect to be here but isn't here? I think sort of one of my favorite examples is, let's say you're doing a marketing campaign and you want to understand, hey, should we use some of the same practices in our next marketing campaign? So you sort of look at the different factors and you sort of have this spike and you're like, hey, whatever we did there worked. And so you put together a whole marketing plan about how I should go do these things that happened when this spike happened. But if what I'm not looking at is what was our projected engagement with the marketing campaign, and looking at where we were sort of over and where we were under versus just looking at what was the raw amount of engagement, you're going to find really different outcomes. And so when we have these aha moments, it takes a lot to sort of step back and say, let me not go sing this from the rafters yet. Let me sort of go do the due diligence to say, how can I ask this question in a deeper way to make sure that I'm identifying those things that I'm not even aware I'm missing yet. And that means to do that, you need to have a trusted group of people around you that you can run your analysis by, that you can have them poke holes at it. I know that sometimes that's not like the funnest feeling to say like, hey, go critique this insight I found. But having some trusted people around you and developing trust with other people by providing that to them is really gives you that gut check before you go into that executive meeting or into that meeting with your boss to make sure that you have the confidence. And so you're being able to sort of set aside your like, yay, I found this aha moment to say like, really, is this the best thing for the business?
Right. Checks and balances are very important. So next slide here, no discussion would really be complete here, I guess, if we didn't discuss trends and developments in data visualization. So I'd really like to hear each of your perspectives on the following couple of topics. I guess we can start with Aaron here. Aaron, what are some emerging and developing trends that you're seeing in the data visualization space right now?
Totally. One thing that I've been very excited about observing is increasing ways that visualizations become interactive. Instead of just being an image you can look at, things you can really get your hands on, so to speak, whether it's, with a guided user interface on a computer or increasingly, voice interfaces. There's some cool news from Tableau on that front with Ask Data. And there's some interesting research out of MIT and elsewhere that says that the best way to really interact with and understand data is when we actually have multimodal interactions. Maybe when we, pinch to zoom in on a certain part of the timeline, but then ask out loud the question, oh, but do we see the same trend in Europe? And can kind of build iteratively using different means of interaction. So I think the interactivity is one very cool trend. The other, I think, is every chief data officer I talk to pretty much describes this evolution path they're on from descriptive analytics, what happened last quarter, to predictive analytics, what's going to happen next quarter, to increasingly saying, let's even do prescriptive analytics, where rather than a human seeing the projection and deciding what to do, maybe we can even just automatically have an action take place, or have human do one click to do that. And so I think this idea of making the visualizations more and more actionable is another exciting trend.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashley, do you have anything to add to that? And also, if either of you would like to field the question, Aaron, you just kind of touched on it, but technologies like machine learning and predictive analytics, how are these changing data visualization as well?
Yeah, so I'll try to integrate that into my answer. So where I'm seeing sort of two big emerging trends developing is really saying, taking data from sort of being in the domain of the data visualization tool to putting data right at the hands of a user when it could be actionable for them. So when you're in your sales CRM tool, bringing out data visualizations right there in the interface that allows you to make a better decision in that moment. Who should I call today? I'm in the CRM tool, I'm looking up phone numbers. Maybe we can bring together data from across the organization right there into that tool to help that salesperson make a better decision. Or if you're in help desk, maybe what you're looking at is you're in ServiceNow and you're sort of understanding trends and analysis around help desk tickets so you can better staff. And it's right there in the workflow that you're doing. So it's sort of really seeing things develop. But this cool thing is happening at the same time, which is that these domains of data science are sort of starting to come together with data visualization. Things like machine learning algorithms and predictive modeling can be integrated in with existing data sets to put those tools of the data scientists right there in the hands of a person making a decision. So the data's already been modeled. It maybe has the confidence that that model works well, that it's been built correctly. The data scientist has signed off on it, but then it's right there for someone to use in their job. And I think these two things coming together is what's going to be really powerful to organizations going forward. Having what you need in the moment that you have it, and then integrating these sort of predictive technologies right there so that you can ask the bigger question as you're working.
Right, absolutely. So just being mindful of the time here, I know we're reaching the 35-minute mark in the conversation, so I just want to leave a few minutes at the end for any audience questions that may be submitted, and just a reminder to go ahead and submit any of those questions that you might have for Aaron and Ashley. But let's just round out our discussion here with this final question that addresses what lies ahead. So I'd like to hear about any predictions that either of you might have regarding where the data visualization industry is headed, what changes and developments you foresee in tools or even strategic approach to data visualization. Aaron, would you be able to start us off on this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to try. It's hard enough to use visualization to understand the present, but obviously we think a lot about the future at Alation. one thing that Ashley was just describing that really resonated with me, and I know would resonate with many of our customers, was that idea of just-in-time interventions and actionability, the idea that you've got the viz that's relevant right on your sales call or right. And, I think one thing we're excited about at Elation is bringing the powers of a data catalog around understanding and trust and infusing those just in time as well. So, I think, one of the reasons sometimes organizations struggle to put analytics into insights in real time is that there's an often deserved skepticism that it's going to be accurate and a worry that something's going to be wrong with the data quality, the data interpretation. And I think if we can fuse understanding and trust and analytics and put that right into every employee and knowledge worker's flow, and even going beyond the knowledge worker to every worker, that's going to enable that mix of speed of action and agility with a trust and a confidence to drive the business.
Great. Ashley, any predictions?
We've come really far. I think sometimes we forget about how far we've come in the visualization world. I sort of like to equate it to sort of what's happened with mapping, right? It used to be, back in the day, I had to call AAA if I was going on a road trip to sort of get the point-to-point turns in the trip ticket. And that's how it used to be when you had to reach out to the BI team to get that report that you needed. And then what happened is self-service came along, and people were able to put in their own start and endpoint and have it generated without talking to anyone in IT. And then what happened is we put that right into the car so that you had those turn-by-turn directions right as you needed them. And I think that the direction that we're going to go with with data visualization is that those insights is going to now sort of be like Waze. It's going to start notifying me when I need to know something versus needing to look every day. So instead of getting that subscription every morning, you're going to get that subscription when you need to know it throughout the day. And I think that there's sort of this step further as well, which is, now we're starting to get navigation built into cars. You have Teslas that can drive you from point A to point B. And I think as data visualization and data in general becomes so integrated in business process and business decision making, I think that's where we're really going to have to get. And so what we need lots of people to have small wins on the data they know best, so that an organization can have someone like a CDO or a CIO really put together a whole strategy for their organization.
Got it. Great. So some really great insights from the both of you here. So let's see, we have a few audience questions that came in during the presentation. Let's see if we can answer some of these before we have to sign off here. So we have one here at the top. It looks like, Aaron, your discussion about data catalogs resonated with a member of our audience. And they're asking, is there a data catalog template that you may be able to share to get a better idea of what goes there?
Excellent question. I'm not positive I'm understanding what a template in this context means exactly, but if you go to Alation.com, Alation with an A, A-L-A-T-I-O-N, you'll see a bunch of screenshots from how our catalog looks, and including some anonymized customer examples and things that might help you get a sense. I think if you can't go there, the best way to picture a good data catalog is like a good consumer catalog. And again, I used the example of Amazon.com before, right? So Amazon will say, if I want to buy a book, it'll say, okay, I can look inside and read a chapter. That might be data samples. It'll say who's used it and how they used it and how they like it. With a catalog like Elation, all of that is automated by parsing the query logs. And so all of this rich context helps you find the data that you need to do your analysis or understand your question, understand what it is, where it comes from, trust that it's good. So I hope that paints a bit of a picture. And again, at our website, you can see a lot of pictures that'll be worth thousands of words.
Great. And just a reminder to the audience, there is actually a link to Elation's website as well as Tableau's website in our attachment section. So if you'd like to learn more about data catalogs, you can check out the attachment section for those. And this question here coming in from the audience, I think Ashley can field this one. So it says, given Tableau's recent acquisition, do you think that this will become a trend in the BI industry, acquisition and consolidation of companies in this space?
So it's a really great question. You know, for people who aren't aware of the news, Tableau and Salesforce had an agreement announced on Monday to come together as one company. You know, I think that what we're seeing is that we're seeing the productization of data, that the value to data in a company is not just that you can make a better decision, but that you can allow your customer to make a better decision. And I think that that environment is sort of maybe what's fueling a little bit of this consolidation, that the value of data alone is no longer in the $1 million change or finding that that $1 million in revenue that wasn't accounted for, whatever the case may be. It's really about the value that comes when you take the data that your organization has and you're able to monetize it in a way. So some places like Netflix do this by keeping, like Amazon does this really well when they're saying, hey, you are looking at this thing and these other people were looking at this thing and this is what they ultimately bought. You'd also like this. And those are really ways that they're monetizing their data. And so data is becoming more and more important to organizations. I think it's one of now the big key factors in business transformation. And so at Tableau, we think it's really important. We still do, even now at the end of this week, that it's important that you can bring all of your data together. And if we can bring your data together from all of your systems, that you can really provide value in the industry. So I think all of this is just seeing a reflection that the data is becoming critical to organizations on a level that it wasn't before. I don't know what's going to happen with other acquisitions or with other data companies, but I think it's a really, really exciting time, not just to be at one of these companies, but to be a user of one of these software, because sort of the power that can come by bringing different technologies together is really, I think, what gets unlocked with these acquisitions.
Right, absolutely. So I think this question is in reference to the discussion point earlier where we chatted about how to tailor your visualizations to your audience. But this person is asking, given that one knows their audience, doesn't Tableau have the 6 tips for the best visualization of a dashboard, and wouldn't this be appropriate for this purpose?
So yeah, our 6 tips for the best visualization is a really great resource. We make a lot of resources free on our website, something like 60 hours of training videos and a bunch of white papers and webinars as well that are really around best practice and visualization. I think one of the things that sets Tableau apart from other data visualization tools is how much we've actually built best practices into the product by default. So that when you select 2 dimensions and a measure, you are getting one type of graph that's really good for making decisions. But you can sort of take this a little bit further. We've been doing a bunch of eye tracking testing at Tableau. And one of the things that we've found is that regardless of where you put big numbers on a dashboard, people's eyes are drawn to them. And so you can sort of use this knowledge, and I think it's detailed in these best practice documents, about how to really build something that will be impactful immediately and will be impactful to someone on their own without having you assist them through it. So Tableau's released a lot of really cool features in the last couple of years that allow you to sort of interact with dashboards like never before. And so building a dashboard that allows sort of interaction and for the end user to find their insight quickly and to take it further is really exciting. So yeah, I would totally point people to our website and that best visualizations for a dashboard document.
Awesome, great. So yeah, if you're interested in those 6 tips or any of the additional resources that Ashley mentioned, definitely go check out tableau.com in the attachment section. So, and with that, we're just about out of time for today. So I want to thank all of you in the audience for tuning in to this discussion, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. Also, a big thank you to our wonderful participants, Erin and Ashley, for joining me today and sharing your expertise with everyone. It was a pleasure chatting with both of you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, have a great rest of your day, everyone, and be sure to rate the presentation. Thank you so much.